Hello brothers and sisters, and welcome back to an all-new Sermons in the Park. As always, I am your Reverend Jamie McCaskill. I want to thank you for taking the time once again, like I do every week, for joining me here and watching this video as I share the message the Lord has given me to send to you. It's always just so great and wonderful, and I appreciate each and every one of you. You're all like a family to me, and I love each and every one of you, and I can't thank you enough. It's been a hard time for the past 3 months dealing with Jennifer being in the hospital, and if you follow me on Facebook, you probably saw I did a live video showing you where she is, showing you even the room where she's at. I did stop it so that I could spend time with her, and we had a meal together, and we watched a little bit of TV together, and I spent time with her today. So thank you all. You guys are basically my only outlet besides going to work and spending time with my sons. So anyway, let's bow our heads and thank our Heavenly Father for all the great and wonderful gifts, all the great and wonderful things that He gives us each and every day. Heavenly Father, we come to you again, and we thank you for everything that you've given us, everything that you continue to give us. We wake up in the morning breathing, Father, and that is a miracle in and of itself, and it's a gift that you give us. We were able to walk around and see this planet, this gift of beauty that you've given us. Your word tells us that the heavens declare your glory, and we can see these things. We can see the blue sky, the clouds, as you hold water up in the air. All these things. You give us food, water, air, animals that we can see and touch, and you give us family and friends. All these things are gifts that you've given us, and we love you, Father, and we thank you for those things. Our neighbors, who even if they don't speak to us, they're still gifts that you've given us, that we can go out and, if we wanted to, we could approach them and try to make friends with them. These are all things that you've given us, Father, and we love you for it, and we thank you. You gave us your Son Jesus, who died all those years ago on that cross, so we could have a relationship with you, and that's all because you want this relationship with us, and we thank you for that. And we come to you, Father, and we just want to say thank you, and we love you. Amen. So, if you've been following along, you know what we do here on Sermons in the Park is we do currently what we're doing is we're reviewing the Bible book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and yes, even sometimes word by word in that chapter. So here we are this week. We're in Judges. So if you want to pause it here and go back and watch the first 18 chapters, be my guest, and then come back here and you can watch from where we are. Now I want you to think back to last week. If you've not been following along, like I said, if you want to know more, please go back and watch the entire book of Judges. Anyway, I want you to think back to last week. Now, we've been reading this book, and last week we got a good realization, right, of just how far Israel has fallen. And this week, here in chapter 19, we just keep reading as they just continue to fall. They fall into adultery. There's no hospitality. There's sodomy. There's rape. There's murder, right? All of this has become just a part of their lives. And we see it here in Judges, as well as in our regular everyday lives, don't we? Right? When we live by our own laws, okay, social order and morality, they just do not exist. When people are left to their own devices, they fall into horrible and unimaginable sins. Anyways, let's go ahead and read the book of Judges, chapter 19. We're going to read the entire chapter, verses 1 all the way to 30. And we're going to be reading about the Levite and his concubine. And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah, And his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house in Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her, and to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink, and he lodged there. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, Comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterwards go you away. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, Be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. And when the men arose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him. Therefore he lodged there again. And he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, and the damsel's father said, Comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and they did eat both of them. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Behold now, the day draweth towards evening. I pray you tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. But the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And there were with him 2 asses, saddled. His concubine also was with him. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent. And the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, and let us turn into this city of the Jebusites, and lodge to it. And his master said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger. There is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said unto his servant, Come, and let us draw near to one of these places, to lodge all night in Gibeah or in Ramah. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he set him down in the street of the city, for there was no man that took them into his house to lodging. And behold, there came an old man from his work out in the fields at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And he said unto him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, towards the side of Mount Ephraim. From thence am I, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants, there is no want of anything. And the old man said, Peace be with thee, however, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. So he brought him into his house, and gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet, and did eat and drink. Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city certain sons of Belial, which is Baal, okay, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went back unto them, and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray thee, do not do so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into my house, do not this folly. Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. But the men would not hearken to him. So the man took his concubine, and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her, and abused her all that night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman into the dawning of the day, and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning, and opened the door of the house, and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, had fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said unto her, Up, let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up, and gat him unto his place. And when he had come into his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her, together with her bones, into 12 pieces, and sent her unto all the coasts of Israel. And it was so, that all that saw it said, There was no such deed done, nor seen from the land, that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds. This is a sad story, but we're going to break it down. Okay, we're gonna do our best to break this down and make it make sense for us. So, what we do here, after we read the whole chapter, we go back and we start the first verse, and we read each verse, and we break that whole verse down. So let's go ahead and let's reread verse 1. And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Now, I don't want you to be confused, okay? I know a lot of people do. When they see that word concubine, they get confused by it. This is actually a wife. Now, she was most likely a woman who had left her husband to live with him. And again, even though this might have been acceptable among people, you know, they might even considered it legal, but God does not accept that, okay? In fact, let us go ahead and take a look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. Oh, that's 22, sorry. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. But you see, the story that we're reading here, it seems to have taken place, okay, at some point between the death of Joshua, right, and the death of Phinehas. We know that the ark is in Shiloh during this time, and we know that there is no king. And since there's no king, that is right, everyone is doing what they want to, okay? As a Levite, this man should have been more careful who he married, all right? The Levites, they were a tribe that God set aside, this tribe was to be ministers, and they were expected to be above everyone around them. Okay, a concubine traditionally is a woman who acts like your wife, but they do not have the privileges of a wife. You know, sometimes it was someone like a servant girl. Okay, so that's what we're seeing here. Is this is some woman that lived with him. And so let's move on. Let's look at verse 2 now. And his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Now, look at what it says here. It says that she played the whore. Now, by law, she should have been killed. But there was no devotion to holiness at this time. I'll call your eyes again. Let's look at Leviticus. Chapter 20, verse 10. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. But see, this Levite here, he did not let this sin bother him. He even goes back to her sympathetically. Now, I also saw where some say that this whole playing the whore thing, this does not necessarily mean that she committed adultery. That it just means that she had, you know, revolted against him in some way, and she just went home. And I mean, I guess I understand that. She would not be committing adultery at her father's house, right? So, anyway, we see that her father lives in Bethlehem and that she stays with him for 4 months. So let's go on now. Let's look at verse 3. And her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. So he arose, okay, means he got out of bed, and he went after her. He left his home, the verse says, and went after her. So he went to her father's house, which was in Bethlehem, Judah, okay. We see that he went there, as it says, to speak comfortably to her. You could say that he went there to speak his heart, or to speak to her heart. Maybe he knew that she had repented of her sins. Or it truly was just a quarrel between them. Maybe he got angry and she left, and now his anger's cooled down, so he went there to just make up with her. If this is true, then it was commendable of him, right? That he did not put her away. We know that she had departed from him. The verse says that he went there to reconcile and to bring her again. He wanted her to come home. He wanted to bring her home, right? Just like before. The verse goes on to say, having his servant with him and a couple of asses. All right? So he brought 2 asses with him. Why is that important? That means he was confident she was going to come home. He brought one for her and one for her stuff. The verse goes on to say, and she brought him into her father's house. This to me makes it sound like she must have seen him, right, away from the house. He must have saw her out there away from the house, maybe in the fields working, in the streets somewhere. Wherever he saw her is unimportant, but it appears that she was happy. She saw him and she was happy, right? She was happy to see him, so she receives him in a loving manner. She even welcomes him into her father's home. So everything looks well. The verse then says, and when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. Again, we see that her father must have liked this guy. Maybe he understood what had happened. Maybe it was his daughter's fault, right? And he was pleased to see that the husband came after her. I mean, yeah, maybe he should have just instructed her to go home. Hey, go reconcile with your husband. Go make things right. What we see here, though, is that this Levite went through a lot to come just to reclaim his wife, reclaim his concubine, this woman that he called his wife. I think that this was all just some fight, right? Because we're seeing him speak friendly with her. Also notice her father is happy to see him. And he's happy to see that he's making this effort to make up with her. Let's go to verse 4 now. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodged there. So her father was prevailing upon him, right? Stay for a little while. He asks him, the verse says, and he abode with him for 3 days. We see by this, right, that he had agreed to stay with him for this long. And his father-in-law was happy with it. The verse says, so they did eat and drink and lodge there. His father-in-law was entertaining him and his servant, I'm sure, giving him food, giving him drink, allowing him to stay there. I think this was more for her father's sake, okay? Like a celebration. Now that his daughter and her husband had made up, he loves his daughter. He's fond of the Levite. This became almost like a vacation for the Levite. Let's continue on, verse 5. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterwards go your way. So this verse starts off right where the last one ended. He's ready to leave. It's the 4th day, the day they had agreed upon. And the verse says, when they arose early in the morning, this is talking about the Levite, his concubine, and his servant. They were ready to set on their journey home, okay? The verse says, and the damsel's father said to his son-in-law, comfort thy heart with a morsel of bread. This is essentially him just offering him some breakfast, okay? The Bible tells us that bread comforts. It strengthens your heart. Take a look with me. Psalms 104, verse 15. And wine that maketh glad the heart of man, and oil to make his face to shine, and bread which strengthens men's hearts. I did see where some say that it's speaking of provisions, but it doesn't matter. I still think that he could have done that and offered him breakfast. I think he was willing for him to leave, but he wanted to, to just have a meal with him before he left. And he probably wanted just one more minute with him. I mean, have you ever been in that situation where you have someone over, you just don't want them to leave, but it's time for them to go, and you just do anything you can to get them to stay? That's what's kind of going on here. But let's go on, verse 6. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, be content, I pray thee, tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. Now, this does not mean that he sat down again because he had stood up to leave. No, this means that they all went to the table, they sat down for a meal. Alright? The verse says, and did eat and drink, both of them together. This means the father-in-law and the Levite together sat down and enjoyed a meal, which again shows you that the father-in-law did not mean to take some food with you like other people say they had. Alright? He stayed there. He enjoyed a large meal. They drank together after that meal. Why do I say that? Look what the verse says. For the damsel's father had said to the man, be content, I pray thee, tarry all night, let thine heart be merry. This is him saying, come on, man, let us have this evening together, drinking, talking, just enjoying each other's company. And they did. He convinces him to stay another day. Check it out. Look what it says right here in verse 7. And when the man arose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him. Therefore he lodged there again. You see? Look with me. It says, that he went to stand up after having his fill. He was ready to depart on his journey, and the verse says his father-in-law urged him. Urged him. This means that he kept pressing. Alright? Hey, come on. Why don't you stay? Your home will be there tomorrow. Look how late it is. You know, stuff like that. The verse says, therefore he lodged there again. He stayed one more night after his father-in-law pleaded with him. It makes you wonder, was this man lonely? You know, he seems to have trouble letting him go. He just wants him to stay. He's either lonely or the Levite was that good of company. All right? Let's go on, verse 8. And he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, and the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and they did eat both of them. Here we go again. This Levite rises, he's ready to go, and the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, I pray thee. Here he is again, offering him another meal before he journeys. That way he might be hardy, he might be strong, right? The verse goes on, and they tarried until afternoon. Now in the Septuagint, it actually says until the decline of the day, which would be when the sun is declining, like it usually does when it's afternoon. Okay, the verse goes on, and they did eat both of them. Again, he stayed. He had dinner with his father-in-law, and even though we see no mention of the concubine, I don't see any reason anyone should doubt that she was eating too. Okay. We also see that they stayed all night again, or all day again, right? Now, if you're keeping count like I did, they have been there for 5 days, okay? As much as the father-in-law wants them to, they still have to go. They have to go home. I also believe that the Levite was enjoying his time here too, just as much as his father-in-law was. But you know, he had to get home. Right? No matter how long the vacation is, sooner or later, you have to go home. Let's continue on. Let's look at verse 9 now. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, behold, now the day draweth towards evening. I pray you tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. Again, we see that they stood up from the table, or as the verse says, rose up. Now that he was refreshed, he's ready to go. The verse says, his father-in-law, meaning the damsel's father, said unto him, behold, now the day draweth towards evening. He's saying to him that the heart, or the heat, I should say, and the strength of the sun was getting weaker because it's almost set, right? And again, he says, I pray you tarry all night. After some research, I found out that it was believed to be improper to leave on a journey at this time. Okay, that's a good reason for him to have stayed. But he says, behold, the day groweth to an end. Now this was usually when people who did travel would have actually stopped and set up their camp. They would have pitched their tents and they would have rested, right? He says, lodge here, that thine heart may be merry. Let us continue to enjoy each other's company, right? That's what he's saying. I'm sure you can agree with me when I say it was more fun to stay with family members when you travel than it is to stay in some old crusty hotel room, with no one to talk to. Right? The verse says, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. Here is this line. The word came home. Here's this line. The word home is to thy city. Okay? That word home is to thy city. That's the way it's written in the Targum. You could take this line as he's saying, I will not insist that you stay any longer. that they can leave as soon as they are ready. Okay? Let's move on now. Let's go on to verse 10. But the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem, and there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine also was with him. Now, we see this mention of Jebus, spelled J-E-B-U-S. That is actually the original name of Jerusalem when it was under the control of these people called the Jebusites, okay? It remained in their control until David took it away from them and made it the capital city. We can see this if we turn to 2 Samuel chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 6 through 9. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, which spake unto David, saying, Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither. Thinking David cannot come in hither. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, the same is the city of David. And David said on that day, Whosoever getteth up to the gutter, and smiteth the Jebusites, and the lame, and the blind, that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, The blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So David dwelt in the fort, and called it the city of David, and David built round about from Millo and inward. Alright. We also see it using the name of Salem in Genesis chapter 14, verse 18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And also we see it called Salem in Psalm 76:2. In Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. Anyway, back to verse 10 here, Judges 19:10. The verse tells us that this Levite, he's made up his mind. He's ready to go. No matter how late it was, Bethlehem is about 2 hours away from Jerusalem. Now please realize, alright, Jerusalem was named Jebus here, which means that it was not controlled by any Hebrews. We also see that he has his concubine with him, and that would mean that she's riding one of these 2 asses, okay? Verse 11. And when they were in Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, let us turn into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. Notice how it says the day was far spent. If you simplified this, this would mean that the sun was gone down a long time ago, or it was almost gone. The verse tells us, And the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee. He's approaching him in a very submissive way. He's making it sound like he's worried about his master. Then it says, And let us turn into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. Jebus, a portion of it, was part of the tribe of Judah, but it had been taken away from them sometime after the death of Joshua. And the other part was part of Benjamin. And it was possessed by the Jebusites as well, because if you remember, the Benjaminites, they could not drive them out. We saw this back in Judges chapter 1. Rabbi Ben Gerson said that he believed this was before Judah fought against the Jebusites, and that's believable, considering that it was called the city of the Jebusites, right? We know that the Levite objected to going in because of that fact. He would not have objected if, part of the city was under possession of a Hebrew tribe. This again shows us just how late he left. Remember, it was only a 2-hour travel. Okay? And it was already time to stop. Now, as you traveled, you would have passed, through the streets of a city. That way, if you were in need, someone would see you. Okay? Now, Near East customs demanded that if anyone who needed a place to stay was to be invited in by a local resident, you see this throughout the Bible. But I want you to notice, Gibeah was a city of Benjamin. They show no hospitality to the Levite at all. Now, verses that show this custom, the reason I say that it was a custom of where you had to invite someone in, you see this constantly. Let's look at some of them, so you can see what I'm talking about here. Look at Genesis chapter 18, verse 4. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, wash your feet, and rest yourself under the tree. Okay? Also, chapter 19, verse 2. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house. Tarry all night, wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your way. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. Alright? Also, again, let's look at chapter 24. Same in Genesis. I'm not even leaving Genesis yet. Chapter 24. Alright? Verse 32. And the men came into the house, and he ungirded his camels, gave straw and provender for the camels, water to wash his feet, and the men's feet that were with him. Alright? Now, look, still in Genesis. Alright? Let's look at chapter 43. Verse 24. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house, gave them water, and they washed their feet. And he gave their asses provender. Alright? Now, let's look at the New Testament. You might think, oh, well, maybe that went away. No. Go to Hebrews chapter 13. We're going to just look at the first 2 verses. Verses 1 and 2. Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. You see what I'm saying? This was a tradition. It was a very big custom to help a stranger in need. Alright? Let's continue on. Let's look at verse 12 now. Chapter 19, verse 12, Judges. And his master said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger. This is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. Again, this shows us that Jerusalem, or Jebus as it's called here, was not under Hebrew control. But Gibeah was, which should have made it safer, right? I mean, he's Hebrew. He going to see his Hebrew people. But notice, he's reluctant to enter the city. He calls it a city of strangers because there's no Israelites there. Many of these people would be evil. So he wants to go to Gibeah, which belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. Now, just to show you how desperate he was, this was another 2.5 hours of travel. He's so desperate to get to a city that's friendly to his people that he travels another 2.5 hours. Alright, verse 13 now. And he said unto his servant, Come, let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night, in Gibeah or in Ramah. They would have wanted to go as fast as they can, right? The verse says, to one of these places to lodge all night, in Gibeah or in Ramah. Both of these cities mentioned belong to Benjamin. I like how it's worded here. It makes it sound like he left the choice up to the servant, right? As we said, it's getting late. The sun's going down. Now, Gibeah was 4 miles away from Jerusalem. Ramah, according to Jerome, was 6 miles. So they chose Gibeah because it was the closest one, right? We also can see this in Joshua chapter 18. Chapter 18, verses 24 and 25. And Shepher, Ammoni, and Ophni, and Geba, 12 cities with their villages. Gibeon and Ramah and Beeroth. All right. Now look at Hosea, one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. Chapter 5, verse 8. Blow ye the cornet in Gibeah, and the trumpet in Ramah. Cry aloud at Bethaven after thee, O Benjamin. So, let's go on. Let's look at verse 14. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were in Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. So they passed on by Jebus, right? The verse says, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which again belongeth to Benjamin. They add the part about Benjamin so that you know that this is not, let me repeat, this is not the Gibeah that belongs to Judah, which which you can read about in Joshua chapter 15, verse 57. All right. It sounds like, according to the verse, that the sun went down just as they got there, which makes them decide, hey, it's time to lodge here, because of course they felt more comfortable, with these Israelites. All right, verse 15. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah, and when he went in, he sat him down in a street of the city, for there was no man that took them into his house to lodge. Wow. Did you get that? This verse is telling us that these people, these Israelites who were of the tribe of Benjamin, would not extend the courtesy, that expected courtesy of lodging. This right here opens a door. Okay, a door to immorality. No one in this town extended them any hospitality. God does not teach this to his people. This shows us how low, I should say, that this society had gotten. All right, and if you look, the verse tells us that he was ready to just sleep in the streets. That's right, it says he sat down in the street. Let's go on, verse 16 now. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjaminites. So it was at this time, the time that people would be coming home from work. They're ready to go home. They're ready to go rest. Here's this old man, an older man, who it appears was of some substance, okay? And we read on that it says, which was also of Mount Ephraim, which was the same place that the Levite was from. And so as soon as the old man realizes that he was, probably even more ready, he realizes that, this man's from Mount Ephraim as well. This makes him, more happy to bring them in, to accept them into his home, right? Because, this guy's from the same city as me. We'd have a lot to talk about, The verse says, and he sojourned in Gibeah. He was not originally from here, okay? He was more kind to these people than the others were that lived there. Now, nowhere in this verse does it say that he was a Levite, right? but that he was from a Levitical city. Now, why was he here? We're never told. And I do not think that it was important, or we would read about it. You know that's my rule. If it was important, we'd read about it. The verse says, but the men of the place were Benjamites, right? Remember, just like with the Levites, whose number was not large, all right, others dwelt here as well. The city, being of a tribe, just means that it belonged to them. We see here that this old man lives here, but he came from Mount Ephraim, which belongs to the Levites, right? We see that he's coming home from his job and he's headed home to rest. Well, what's verse 17 tell us? And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? So he was coming home, right? He had been out there working all day. He was tired, probably looking down at the ground, just thinking about his day. Oh man, all these people, And as he's getting close to the city, he looks up. The verse says, and he saw a wayfaring man in the streets of the city. He thought these people were travelers. They would have looked like strangers to him. They would have been dressed differently. And besides, these cities were smaller. We do not think about this today, but most cities were a lot smaller back then. They probably recognized each other. Like in some small towns today. I know back home where I'm from in Jonesville, if somebody wasn't from Jonesville, you knew it. And so he had never seen this man. This verse goes on to say, and the old man said, whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? This is a simple question, right? He's just asking, where did you come from? Where are you headed, right? Just some simple, friendly questions. He stops and he's checking on them. It shows compassion. Compassion that definitely he hadn't seen yet in this city. Verse 18. And he said unto him, we are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, towards the side of Mount Ephraim. From thence am I, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah. But I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. There's not a lot for me to explain from this verse, but I will call your eyes to one point. It says, going to the house of the Lord. He's telling him that he's headed to the tabernacle. Let us remember, that is in Shiloh. He also told him that he's from Ephraim, and that he had been to Bethlehem in Judah. He also points out how no one would take him in. Okay? So, let's move on. Verse 19. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses. There is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There is no want of anything. He tells him, I have straw for the donkeys. I have food to feed them. Because, they had brought all this with them. The verse then says, and there is bread and wine also for me and for thy handmaid. He had enough food and drink for himself and the concubine, which of course was probably packed and carried by that ass. Then the verse says, and for the young man which is with thy servants. This is kind of needless here. The young man who would have been his servant, right? He wasn't with the old man. He's not talking about the old man's servant. What he's getting at is that he has enough food for his party, meaning for his wife, for his servant, and for himself. But there was even enough for that old man's servant. So there's no reason to be shy about letting him stay. They would not be a burden on him. All they wanted was somewhere to lay their head. They just wanted somewhere to rest. This is essentially him saying, we're not beggars, okay? They had the straw that they needed for their animals. They even had their own food, their own drink. They just needed a place to lay their heads. I got to reiterate that. All right. Now, verse 20. And the old man said, peace be with thee. However, let all thy wants lie upon me. Only lodge not in the streets. Oh, how many people that were here, of how many people that were there, we're unsure. But it's sad to think that in all of this city, they only found one man in this whole city that was compassionate enough to open his door. He tells them, God's not in the streets. He knows how dangerous this place is, I'm sure. We're going to continue on. Verse 21. So he brought him into his house, gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet and eat and drink. Now, as we see here, it says that he brought them in. You know, he showed them the way to his house. And he did it in a very friendly way. He probably introduced himself as they walked, you know. It isn't like we see in the movies, because of how, you know, movies translate words to screen, where, you know, he would have been quiet the entire time as he walked. He would have bid them welcome, okay? The verse says, and gave provender to their asses. This is the first thing that's mentioned here, because it was the first thing that someone would have worried about at that time, especially when you're arriving in a new place. It makes sense today, right? Because you don't just park your car anywhere. No, these are animals, though. You want to take even more care of your animals. The verse then says, and they washed their feet. This is always strange to us today. Or I should say, it was always strange to me. But in a country that's as hot as the Middle East was, you would definitely want to clean your feet. It's very refreshing, okay? Take a look with me real quick. Genesis chapter 18, verse 4. I've been reading Genesis a lot lately, and this one popped in my head. Let's look at it. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched. Wash your feet, rest yourselves under the tree. Back then, they wore sandals all the time. You know, sandals have your feet open to the elements. It's just something on the bottom, so you're more comfortable when you walk. They would get hot. They would get dirty. After a long, hard day, could you imagine? Wow. So the first thing that they would do when they arrived home was they would wash their feet. I actually liked that when I was watching The Chosen. They had Peter come home, you know, and his wife goes, wash your feet as soon as he gets there. Anyway, and then it says that they did eat and drink. So they sat down and they ate with the old man. They talked with him, right? This is always the neat thing, next thing that you would do. So they would wash their feet and then they would eat and drink. They're refreshing themselves. They just had a long journey. I'm pretty sure they were bushed, right? So let's look on verse 22. Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat on the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thy house, that we may know him. There's a phrase that we don't use anymore. Sons of Belial. If you were to translate that literally, that means worthless fellows, meaning they were perverts. These were men who wanted to commit sodomy against the Levite. Sometimes you see it in the Bible, and it's used for idolaters. I'll show you a couple of them. Look at Deuteronomy 13:13. Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which you have not known. Also, for people who neglect the poor, like we see in Deuteronomy 15:9. Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him naught, and he cry unto the Lord against thee, and it be sin unto thee. For drinks, we see it in 1 Samuel 1:16. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. Then you have it for the immoral, all right, in 1 Samuel 2:12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. And you also have it used for people who rebel against civil authority. We see this in 2 Samuel. Sorry. I set my phone down. 2 Samuel 20 verse 1. Where it says, and there happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet and said, we have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man into his tent, O Israel. And then also in Proverbs 19:28. He that wasteth his father and chaseth away his mother is a son that causeth shame and bringeth reproach. Of course, we have discussed Belial several times, alright? Especially since we started doing judges here. He is, of course, Baal. I want to make sure you understand that. Belial is Baal. But it was also a word for a yoke. Entangling, injuring, meaning that they cast of the yoke of decency. They cast off the yoke of decency, right? We see sons of Belial used several times in the Old Testament for people for scoundrels who do wicked things. Okay, look at 1 Kings 21:10. I know I'm calling you guys to read a lot here tonight. And set two men, sons of Belial, before him, to bear witness against him, saying, thou didst blaspheme God and the king, and then carry him out and stone him, that he may die. Alright? And it's different, different wickedness, such as drunkenness, which we see in, 1 Samuel 1:16. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. We see it used for abuse of power in 2 Samuel 2:12. And Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. All right. For idolatry in Deuteronomy 13:13. Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which ye have not known. Alright, rebelliousness in verse 22. These people they're reprobate. Belial is also a word that is often used for Satan by Jewish writers. We see that here in 2 Corinthians 6:15. And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Alright? I read the wrong one. Verse 15, not 16. And what concord hath God with Belial? What part hath he that believeth with an infidel? These people, they're horrible. They're despicable. There's no law and order. So not only were they not willing to help these people, right? Now they want to rape him. They want to rape this man. These men are pure evil. They want to drag this man out of this old man's home. They're beating on the door, trying to take him. But of course, this old man is not going to let this happen. Let's look at verse 23 now. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them, and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly. Seeing that this man is come into mine home, do not this folly. We see this old man, he opens the door, and he tries to convince these people to leave. He walks out to them. He talks to them. He says, and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly. It is clear that it was clear from this here that he's begging them. He's begging them, do not commit this sin. Do not rape this man. He's trying to dissuade them in a very tender way. He says to them, seeing this man has come into my house, do not this folly. This is him trying to use the law of hospitality. This is saying that they should not. This is something that should not be infringed upon. You know, you're obliged to protect the visitor in your home, no matter what. You know, these men are cowardly. They're selfish. What we see them do is an example of lawlessness. We're seeing where lawlessness will lead you. This old man, he offers them his daughter. Some believe that the Levite offers his concubine, but we'll get to that later. It could have been the old man offers the Levite's concubine. It's sad. Take a look with me real quick at Genesis 19. We're going to look at verses 4 and 5. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, and they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Just think about that. Now, let's go on to verse 24. Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. This old man says, I will bring out now. This is something that I have told you we should never do. Do you know what that is? Compromise. This old man is compromising. He's committing a disgraceful compromise. And he does it to try to be more hospitable to the Levite, though. He should have protected all of his home. That includes the daughter and the Levite's concubine. The Levite should have done the same thing. Even if it meant that he would die to protect that woman. What we see here is a low value of women. Just looking at how he was willing to hand them over, his daughter and the concubine of his guest, to these ruffians, these wicked people. We saw Lot also plunge into indecency in the same way, didn't we? What we see here, though, is it's repeating. It's a repeated rape and murder. It's a sad sequel to it. Even with the old man. What the old man does here is wicked. I will never understand how someone, even this old man, could do something so horrible. He was willing to hand over his own daughter to these men to be raped. It's too sinful for me to even attempt to explain it. Let's just move on. Verse 25. But the men would not hearken to him, So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. We see that it says the man took his concubine, brought her forth unto them. This is very weak and cowardly. Not just for him, but for anyone. But he's supposed to be a man of God, and I mean the Levite here. This could be the Levite doing this. It could be the old man. Since doing my research for this, I'm having to read my research notes, but since that, I've come to realize that the wording here does not sound like it was the Levite. It sounds like the old man grabbed the concubine and took her out. You know, but if it was the Levite, you know, he did not see her until the next morning. That means that he went to bed and he slept. Okay, so either the concubine was taken while the Levite was asleep, or the Levite knew and he laid there in bed out of fear, because we see that he rises to leave, right, in verse 28. I've seen where some believe, like I said, that you know, and like I said, just told you, I think it might be the old man that does this. Either way, though, it doesn't matter. What we're reading here is a very cowardly thing for someone to do. To me, for one of the most revolting and horrible things that I've ever read was what we're reading here. And remember, we said that these people have fallen, and they do what's considered right in their own mind. This is a twisting here. It just shows us how they think. They think that this is all right. And like I said, I believe it was the old man that did this. You know, why didn't the Levite stop it? So that's why I'm saying he either had to have been asleep, or he just didn't help his wife. I wish I knew the answer to this for you. I wish that I could say this is what happened and this is why. But I don't. These men, they gang raped this poor innocent woman. It's disgusting. Let's just move on. Verse 26. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day, fell down at the door of the man's house, where her Lord was, till it was light. These wicked men, they had abused her all night long, and then they left. They left her there. We see that they must have taken her away from the house, right? Because we're seeing her come back, you know, by any means that she could. Because what do we see here? It says, and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was. It says Lord, and it's used to describe her husband, not his servant, his wife. That's what the Bible calls her. We see that she had returned to where her husband was, at this old man's home. We don't know how she got there. We do know, though, it says that she fell down. She was so weak that she lays down. She doesn't even knock. If she does, we don't read it. And she waits there for him to open the door. The verse tells us, till it was light. Meaning, when the sun rose. Okay? Because, as we've discussed before, sins like this always occur at nighttime, under the cover of darkness, because they felt that no one sees, no one knows. You don't tell me that didn't happen today. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Verse 27. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And he beheld the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. I have no doubt in my mind that the Levi woke up early, because I really doubt he had a restful night's sleep. Not with all that happening, right? And his wife, that we've read about so far that he cared dearly for, she was out there with these brutes. The verse says that he opened the door of the house and went out to go his way. Now, this could mean that maybe he thought he was going to go find her, right? Maybe I don't think it's so, but maybe it means he was going to leave without her, wanting to preserve his own skin, thinking she was gone. The verse says, and behold, the woman his concubine was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. Read that again. Look at how it describes her. She was reaching for that door, like someone trying to save themselves. Now, some say she was laying with her head on her hands, like she was sleeping. But to me, it makes more sense because we see that he thought she was asleep. Why do I say that? Because the next verse, just read it. Just read verse 28 with me. And he said unto her, Up, let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up, gat him unto his place. Do you see that? He thinks that she's just asleep. He tries to wake her up. He tries to get her, hey, honey, let's go. The verse says, but no one answered. Well, she couldn't answer. She's dead. And Josephus tells us that she died from a combination of grief and shame. She did not know how she was going to face him in the morning. Me, I believe that she just had so many injuries from what was done to her. Abernell, he adds that the night was cold and she didn't have any clothing on. We see the verse say, then the man took her up upon an ass, carries her dead body away. He doesn't seek justice, not at this time. He was probably afraid to even try. He's expecting that none would occur, right? The verse says, and the man rose up and got him into his place. So he went home, right? He went to Mount Ephraim, and I believe he probably rushed there. He does not go to Shiloh like he planned, right? Why? Because the circumstances had changed, right? He's not going to commit a sacrifice and give praise to God. No. Now he's seeking justice from the tribes. He has just found his wife dead. He found her there. He knew she wanted help, right? But he was a coward and he didn't help her. I really don't, I cannot wrap my mind around it. That's why I think that the only logical explanation I can give you is that he was asleep and the old man did it. That is the only way I can wrap my head around this. Let's move on. Verse 29. And when he came into his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her, together with her bones, into 12 pieces, and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. What we're seeing here is that it says he divided her. He divided her into 12 pieces. This is bizarre. This is strange. He cut his wife into 12 pieces. He does it as a way to seek vengeance. I doubt he just sent the parts away, It must have included a message that he would have sent with a messenger. He knew there had to be a lot of people who were going to read this and who would avenge what had happened. Let's face it, after hearing what happened, I'm sure that people were angry. This was a very nasty, grisly deed that was done. He did a very grisly thing, but like I said, he did it to summon those tribes to come to his aid. Israel recognized it as a call to war. 12 pieces. Think about that. There's 12 tribes, and he sent out 12 pieces. It lets them know just how degraded they have become. Okay, so here we are. We're at the last verse of this terrible, sad chapter. We're at verse 30. So let's go ahead and read it. It says, "And it was so, that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done, nor seen, from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds." Everyone that saw it, they saw the piece that was sent to them, right? They were made to know what happened. Josephus tells us that he told the messengers to let everyone know what happened to her, what caused her death. The verse says, "Said there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came out of Egypt unto this day." They were talking about how the body was cut to pieces and sent about like this. It was shocking. It was awful. But so was the cause of it, right? We see it referenced again later in Hosea, my favorite book. Hosea chapter 9, verse 9. "They had deeply corrupted themselves as in the days of Gibeah. Therefore he will remember their iniquity. He will visit their sins." I think what we read here is just an observation that is made by, the one who wrote the book, which was Samuel. And I think it's sad. I believe that it was Samuel. But what is said, next, I believe was the words of the Levite who had sent these pieces. Or maybe it was the person who had accepted the delivery. It says, "Consider of it, take advice, speak your mind." He's saying, think about it yourself. Consult one another as to what should be done. And give me your opinion. We know that it got their attention. Maybe now they will come together and decide what should be done, right? To these people that did this. People who dared to call themselves Hebrews. These people are worse than the heathens, right? Alrighty. I want to thank you all for joining me here again today. Like I always say, it's been a pleasure to stand here before you on these video messages that I do. Now, someone who watches came to me and said they would like for me to start going back to the park and doing them live on Sundays. If this is something that you are interested in, please comment below, message me on Facebook. I prefer you message me so we can talk about it, but even if you comment below, it's fine. Again, I ask you, comment below when you watch this. I want to try to keep that going. I want to see how many people do that. I want to see when you guys watch and things like that. It means a lot to me. I know this was a very depressing chapter to review, a very tough subject to touch on. I just wanted to clear up a little bit about that word concubine, because people look at it and they think that means a slave girl. But yeah, thank you all for joining me here. I pray that the Lord continues to bless you and keep you. And I will see you all here next week on all new Sermons in the Park. Thank you so much, and God bless you.